So this is the second in the series of Shared Future podcasts and little videos that we're doing here and conversations that we're having here in the European Parliament. This one is from Strasbourg. The last one, as you know, was from Brussels, and we'll maybe even do one on why that's the case. But today, last time round, we had people from Ireland and from the UK. So we had an MEP from Ireland, an MEP from the UK, one from the right of the political spectrum, one from the left, and we were talking about Brexit and UK-Ireland relationships. I thought what would be useful this time is maybe just to shine a little bit of light into the group that I'm a part of in the European Parliament, and to talk a little bit about that. As you know, as a member of the Alliance Party, I'm a Liberal, and therefore the Liberal and centrist grouping here in the European Parliament is the one that I've joined, called Renew Europe. So just to give a little bit of insight for those of you who aren't aware, we all come from different political parties from different countries, but when we come here, guided by our vision and our values, we form political groupings. So we have a centrist kind of Liberal grouping in the middle, which is Renew Europe. But there are also similar groups on the right and on the left and on the far right and the far left. And people can also choose not to be members of any of those groups, to be independent. And they negotiate amongst themselves. So the first thing you do when you arrive and you become a member of a group is to start to negotiate and get to know your other colleagues. Because obviously you have to find shared positions, because although you have your own policies and manifestos, you've got to work together with others to impact and have some influence over the proceedings. So I'm really delighted today that we have with us two MEPs. We have Karen Melchior from Denmark and also Fredrick Federley from Sweden. We're all in the Renew Europe group together, but they are particularly interesting because, unlike in Northern Ireland where we only have one Liberal party, in Sweden and in Denmark they have two Liberal parties. So they fight elections against each other. They come to the European Parliament. They then enter the same political group and they have to work together for the rest of the term. So I want to talk a little bit about that if I can, because I think it's a really interesting one. You're both in that situation. Karen, how do you find that as a new MEP? So you've just fought an election against your political rivals, and the closest rivalry is often the people who are closest to you. So how do you find it now coming to be part of the Renew Europe group and actually working alongside your former rivals?
Well, I knew when I was running in the election that we would most likely be in the same group, because it's been like that for the last couple of decades. And as you said, we joined the European Parliament based on our visions and values. And part of the values that we do share, even though we're two Liberal parties in Denmark, which is the Danish Liberal Party and the Danish Social Liberal Party, is that we are Liberal parties. We put emphasis on the rights and obligations of the individual and not of specific classes or levels of society, or perhaps having the family as the center of society. And in that way, I find it natural that we're working together here, also because, as you mentioned, the spectrum of policy in the European Parliament is much wider than it is in most national states, and especially than it is in Denmark. So even if we find ourselves sort of on opposite sides in Danish politics, we are more on the same side of the room in European Parliament.
Because it's much broader in terms of context. Fredrick, you have been here longer. We're both new MEPs. You have been here longer, and I'm just interested in how you find the new Renew Europe grouping, because to put that in context, you come here obviously with other Liberal colleagues who were your rivals in Sweden. You then join a grouping that involves other Liberals like ourselves, but also this time has expanded to include the Renaissance MEPs from France, who are themselves a very broad coalition, kind of under Emmanuel Macron, but spanning kind of left, centre and right. So I'm just interested, how have you found that in contrast to, for example, last time ALDE were very clearly an alliance of Liberal Democratic parties? Has it been more difficult? Has it been interesting? How do you find it?
Interesting. It's interesting for sure. No, it's very different now because what we're also doing is we're just not taking the old group and giving it a new name. We're doing everything from scratch. So I think that compared to the other groups, we're lacking a bit behind at the moment, because we're writing new statutes, we're writing new organization structures and new people on new positions and so on. I think it was a bit quicker up and running the last time because basically it just went on. And a second part making us a bit slower at the moment for the start is that we had last time the turnover, I think, with new members was about 20% in our group. Now there's about 20 out of 108 who are old ones. That means we have a lot of training to do. Yeah. I had lunch with a Luxembourgish colleague today, and you know, so I have this staff. What are they supposed to do? I'm reading like basically every part. No, they're going to prepare that for you because you will not have the time. Yeah. You will have short notices on everything, and if you need, you will have the big papers behind so you can check things up. And so we're still in a kick-off phase, but I think that when we really are up in full speed, we can make miracles because the old ways are gone, where the political left and the political right could just shake hands and make shady deals in the background. They need us to be there, and we don't want to do the shady deals. We want it open and transparent, and we want to be able to have the dialogue with the citizen in a whole other way. So. Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the things that's also changed. You've mentioned an influx of new members, which I don't know about you, Karen, but I find that quite reassuring because I'm not the only person who gets confused about what's going on and the speed of votes and everything else that happens. But I think also the fact that despite all of the polarisation in politics globally, that the kind of centre and liberal parties in Europe actually performed so well in this election has been actually a really positive thing and has allowed us to hold the right and left more to account than has maybe been the case before. I mean, do you see that happening not just in terms of Europe generally, but in Denmark? Is that something that you see?
Very much so. In 2014, the far-right party in Denmark, they got 4 seats out of 13 in Denmark, and this time they were reduced to only 1. And we both had national and European elections this time, nearly at the same time, and people went away from the sort of peripheries of politics and went more towards the centre, both in the European elections and the national ones.
Yeah, and in Sweden, is that true also?
We're a little bit behind Denmark, so the Sweden Democrats, which is the Swedish right-wing populist party, they are still growing. Actually, it seems like they might even be the biggest party in the polls. But then again, you have to take into account that both the Conservative Party and the Social Democratic Party, who has always been dominating the political scene, have been decreasing. When I was getting into politics, a bad election for Social Democrats in Sweden was if they had about 42%. And now they're happy when they have 24. So it has changed the whole palette of politics. And I think it's gone the furthest in the Netherlands, where they have 16 parties in national parliament now. We think it's a bit crazy much in Sweden. Now we have 8, and we can see in the parliament now, 9 groups, and it was like 5 just a couple of minutes ago. So. But what happened in the European election was that actually it was a pro-European election in Sweden. We thought that there would be 4 or 5 seats for Sweden Democrats. It turned out to be 3. Still 3 too many, but then again, not the kind of success they were expecting. So.
I mean, that's really interesting because in Northern Ireland, for the first time ever, we elected a Liberal MEP. It's never happened before.
We're so happy to have you. We're so happy to have you.
There was a surge to it, and it wasn't even that we kind of scraped in at the last minute. I mean, it was a resounding victory for Liberal politics in a part of the world that rarely is seen as a Liberal place, which I think is a really important kind of step forward for Northern Ireland, and was also reflected. We had local government elections just a few months before, and we saw my own party gain seats in all but 1 local council in Northern Ireland. And so from our perspective, it has seen a kind of transformation. I suspect, at least in part, as a reaction to some of the kind of negative nativistic and identity-driven politics that we see across Europe and indeed further afield. We're in the odd situation, I suppose, in that within the member state, we have another Liberal party, but they don't contest elections in Northern Ireland. So the Liberal Democrats are my colleagues in the UK, but we're separate parties. We share vision and values, as we do here, but actually they don't contest elections in Northern Ireland, and we allow our members in Alliance to be card-carrying members of the UK Labour Party or Liberal Democrats, neither of whom actually contest elections in Northern Ireland. So I guess from that perspective it's slightly unusual, but that's our kind of bottom line in terms of membership. So for me, it's been interesting because normally when I go into a coalition, and we do have coalition government in Northern Ireland, though it's a very rigid coalition under kind of consociational models. We have 5-party coalitions, and we find those quite difficult. So to be in this much larger kind of consensual kind of politics. But people in England, where politics has always been very majoritarianism, so majoritarian in Westminster, find any form of coalition actually quite straining, and I think we're seeing that in Brexit, where the Remain parties haven't really been able to coalesce and find form and shape around consensus. I like the form of politics here where people try to find consensus because I think it's more constructive, and I think that maybe there are lessons to learn in national politics from how people operate here. Obviously, when we come here, what binds us together is our liberal values and our vision for society, and I want to touch on that a little bit because, as both of you will know, there have been some big changes in Northern Ireland again this week.
Yes.
So we had the passage of legislation on termination of pregnancy. There had been essentially we had a ruling from the court that our termination of pregnancy guidance in Northern Ireland, which wasn't the same as the rest of the UK, wasn't compliant with human rights legislation, and so that has now changed. We're waiting on new regulations to be produced, but we know that those regulations will at least be human rights compliant, and so that is, I think, really important. But also we will see equal marriage introduced from January, so people will finally in Northern Ireland, where we actually had the first civil partnerships in the whole of the UK, because of a fluke, our assembly wasn't sitting at the time. And so we had the first civil partnerships, but we're the last to have equal marriage, but that will happen in January. How do you see that change, and what are the challenges that you face in Denmark, Karen, in terms of kind of progressive liberal values? What are the big challenges in terms of trying to engage with society on those issues?
I mean, we were the first country to have civil partnerships back in '89, and so it's a great pleasure for me to see that this is now is values that are shared in all of Europe. We also have equal marriage since a few years now, but I feel in a way that there is a backlash. There is a general acceptance of having equal rights in society, but there is a minority that is saying that this is a form of identity politics and that they refuse to call people by the pronouns that they would prefer to be called by, and movement towards sort of transphobia in Denmark as well. And it's sort of, people are sort of saying, oh, this is being too politically correct and we don't want to actually give people equal rights because this is identity politics. And I find that a little bit worrying, that you have a growing tendency of trying to find an opinion that is different than the majority, and actually being anti-progressive in a time where the sort of major stream of movement of policy in society is going to be more progressive. Fortunately, the younger generations are much more progressive than the older ones, so I don't think they would accept that.
I think that's a really good point in terms of, we get a lot about political correctness and virtue signalling and all of these kind of accusations, but at the end of the day, what we call political correctness and are criticised for, most people would just call common courtesy of actually respecting people.
Exactly.
And I think that sometimes, you know, people feel that it's an imposition, but it's not an imposition to respect somebody's identity and to treat them as an equal. I think that is just courtesy.
In Sweden, the right-wingers now online, if you endorse any kind of minority or someone who's felt left out by society, they call you goodness junkie.
Okay.
So you're like a drug addict to goodness. So being good, meaning caring about people and who they are and respecting them for who they are, has become something bad all of a sudden. And so when was that? You know, if I help a lady across the street, am I a goodness junkie then? No, but that's she's probably straight and white. So that's no problem. But if it would be an immigrant or someone in a wheelchair or someone with a different color of the skin, then all of a sudden it will be a problem. So they're so good, the right wingers are twisting everything. So being good, being nice, whether you're religious or not, but looking to the main Christian message of turning the other cheek and being loving and so on, how can that be something something bad all of a sudden. It's rather frightening how they're turning and twisting stuff.
It is. I mean, one of the phrase that I get thrown at me a lot is about being a virtue signaller, and I'm going, well, virtue is a good thing. That's what it means.
Yeah.
And to signal virtue, to say that this is a good thing to do, isn't an insult. To be a liberal isn't an insult. To be a do-gooder isn't an insult. If you're doing good, that is a good and welcome thing. But I think there's a tendency for people to see that as a soft option, when in fact I think that if you really want to protect people's rights, if you want to treat people as equal, it often leads to very difficult and challenging conversations. And I think that it's easy to dismiss people. It's much easier and lazier to dismiss people. And I think diversity is still a challenge in all societies. And it's something that I was really interested in here in terms of even the discussions we had in our own group meeting last night around migration and those challenges of how we deal with those issues. Because I think having, as a liberal, a social conscience, caring about the individual and having compassion in society are things that actually really matter, but they also lead to massive challenges in terms of how we manage society.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm also interested in this series of finding out more about you as individuals. So, Karen, tell me something about yourself. Who are you? How did you get into politics? And why are you an MEP?
I grew up in Denmark, but I've also lived both in Africa and in India as a child. And I then worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and have been quite interested in what influences Denmark and Denmark's role in the world. And I saw that the European Union is the organization and the collaboration that Denmark uses when we want to change something in the world.
Yeah.
And so I thought that would be the most powerful place to actually make my mark on the world. So I decided about 7 years ago to go into politics. I became a member of the Danish Social Liberal Party and ran for the European elections back in 2014, because I'd been a civil servant for a number of years, and I was making sure that the opinions of other people, that could become reality. And so I thought, well, it could be nice to have opinions of my own.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you share them very articulately, and I really have been hugely impressed when we're having our discussions and debates. Fredrick, what's your motivation for being in politics? Tell us something about yourself and why you're an MEP.
It all started when I was a kid, and I've always been like one of these who cares for animals and environment and so on. So that's where it started. And at some point I have been active in a number of human rights organizations, not the crazy one, but the one I would say more balanced, and also green organizations. And I realized that there's someone else like pulling the strings. And that's the guys and gentlemen and ladies who have control of the budget. So who has the budget? Politics has the budget. So probably I'm a societal political animal. I've been in this for quite a long time, serving my second mandate here now. I did 2 mandates in the Swedish parliament before. I've been political editor of a regional newspaper. It's been politics all since I was a kid, basically. And the motivation is still the same. Liberty, equality, it goes back to the French Revolution, basically, the ideals, which are being contested once again. Because when I was rather young, I heard the older generation say that democracy is something we have to fight for every day. I was like, oh that's over. No,
it's not.
Not over, because it's out there and the fight is back on. Because I think our generation was at the start too naive. So we let go of the fight. And now we're paying the price for that. And it's, before I leave this over, we have to have pushed those powers back and train a new generation of democracy and equality fighters.
I wasn't a civil servant or a politician. I was an engineer, so that was my background.
Oh, you had a real job.
I designed sewers for a living, so there are jokes in that about preparation for politics. But I came to politics really because I was asked, was the first thing. I didn't care about my community, and I was interested in what was going on. And I joined a political party because at the time of the Good Friday Agreement, I wanted to be part of that opportunity for change. And I joined Alliance automatically, but for me it was much later that I decided to run for politics. But in saying that, I have collected a lot of titles. I have been a councillor, a local councillor. I've been Mayor of Belfast. I have been an Assembly member in Northern Ireland. I have been an MP in Westminster, and now I'm an MEP, though who knows for how much longer. But we won't get into Brexit this afternoon, or we will never finish. I have some quick fire questions to finish on, just really short answers. So I'm going to start with you, Karen. Tell us something about you that would surprise people.
Oh, I'm not good at quick fire questions.
Okay, that's a good one. What about you, Fredrick? What is there? Is there something about you, if people find out, they would be surprised?
No, because I have no skeletons in the closet. They're all out on Twitter, Instagram, and so on. So I used to do drag show for a year.
Have you any advice for Blue Hydrangea, the Belfast drag queen who's currently on RuPaul's Drag Race?
God, I love drag queens. It's so funny, you know. But it was impossible to combine with politics because all of a sudden this face was never there, and there was another face all the time, and political opponents tried to use it. But you know, if I ever get out of politics, first thing I'll do, I'll call my old drag show friends and say, "Bring me on again."
Fabulous activism as well.
Fabulous
activism as well.
But also being a small-scale farmer, combining that by living in several countries. You know, there's so much to every person, and you always try with a public figure to say, "This is you. This is you," and there's so much more to us than that, which we don't have possibility to present. So,
well, the thing that people, well, I suppose there are two things people wouldn't know about me. The first is that I'm addicted to playing Pokemon Go.
I even did it during a group meeting and saved Guy Verhofstadt from one of these.
So I'm a level 38 player, and I also used to be a wedding singer in my spare time, but I'm not going to sing today. Fredrick, give us something in the last week that you've done or been involved in that you're really proud about, whether it's politics or otherwise, just something.
No, I must say that I think that the lunch today was the best part. We're only in the middle of the week yet, but you know, sitting down with a new colleague who's like, we talked about this, there's so many new members. So what happens, she's new, she thinks that everybody else knows each other, but the truth is none of us knew each other. The ones who were here from the last mandate, so we had an advantage. We knew 15 people or something like that. But taking that time with a colleague to make, because we are interdependent. So the better she is at her job, the more confident she is at her job, the easier it gets for me, because then I will know that when she has prepared the voting list, I can trust it. It's been controlled and checked. It's a fair one. So taking your time with a colleague, also being a human being in this, it's not only a legislative machine, it's also a meat machine which can grind you down horribly. So trying to respect people for just being human and taking time for each other. That's So I think the lunch today actually was.
Karen, what made you proud in the last week?
Well, it was the change of legislation in Ireland and the small role that Denmark had in that 30 years ago. It's not something that I individually took part in, but I still can't help but take pride in the role that Denmark has played in that.
I was going to ask you both what makes you hopeful for the future, but actually I think you've just answered it. It's the ability.
But she had such a good answer on the last one. I was so unprepared for that one.
I think what gives me hope for the future.
You have to cut this out. I will look like a fool talking about lunch and you talk about huge reforms of equal rights.
But that was something you did.
Absolutely.
This was just something I'm taking credit for something other people have done.
I think what gives us hope for the future is that politicians, even in big institutions, are still human beings who take care of each other, but also that as Liberals we can affect massive change in society, and we have the power to do that by working together. So thank you, Karen.
Thank
you, Fredrick.
Can I just
really
add one
appreciate
thing?
it. You can, of course.
Just a final thing. I must say that you have made a remarkable impression on the group.
Thank you.
Because when the rest of us have been talking about Brexit, it's been very technical, like columns on how many people will lose their job, how many millions or billions will go out of the trading. When you've been talking about Brexit in the group, it became flesh, blood and lives and the risk of conflict. And that is so important what you bring to us, and I hope that you will be able to stay at least one mandate, hopefully 4 or 5.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciate you both being here. Thank you.